Hello everyone, welcome to Paletopia. So, more changes have come out in the beta for the Aquarion rework while I was away, and just after I'm back, another set of changes have actually come out, which will make this video covering both of those sets of changes a bit challenging since I don't have as much time as for the previous video. I will first start by listing all the changes that have been made in between the two patches, and then I will give my thoughts only on the recording of one single game. So, the most immediately interesting change is Aquarian has gotten another new unit, this one replacing the catapult that they get, so they won't have their aquapults anymore. They will instead have the puffer unit. The puffer, of course, has basically the same stat as a catapult, i.e., like 4 attack, 0 defense, 3 range, and 2 movement is the only different thing, but of course, that's only for the water. So that's kind of the Aquarius equivalent of, a rolled catapult. So obviously, it has float, and you can kind of tell that it's a water creature, thus this unit will actually be like the shark and the jellyfish, which will only be able to move on the water and it cannot go on land. Now, the actual reason why this unit is interesting is the new ability that it has, which is Drench. Drench allows the unit to flood a tile when it actually attacks it. So, the way that this works is pretty interesting. When you select a buffer to show its options for movement and attack, you can target any land tile with an attack. Even if the land tile is empty or even if there is a friendly unit on it, you can target those tiles with an attack, and if there is an enemy on it, it will damage them and flood the tile. But even if there is a friendly unit on it, it will only flood the tile, but it won't do any damage. So obviously this unit is introduced to be the actual way that Aquarion can flood tiles offensively, because I did talk about last video how actually trying to flood tiles into enemy terrain in order to try and invade there always felt very ineffective, and the buffers are going to be the way you're supposed to do that because none of the other changes that I've suggested where flooding a tile should be the same action that creating and breaking ice is for Polaris, and that units should just be able to move and flood terrain. None of those are really changed. By the way, when it comes to my previous video, I did leave a comment under it correcting myself on that tribes are able to use roads even in Aquarian terrain, which allegedly wasn't true, at least in the first version of the rework. But I did just test it now for the purposes of this video, and you absolutely can use roads on Aquarian terrain, so I don't know if they've changed that like now, but I mean, I'll give more thoughts later because I absolutely do think that's stupid, but whatever. But I will give more thoughts later in regards to the puffers as well. So, anyways, moving along, the Sharks have gotten a lot of changes. Originally, they had 10 health and 3 attack and 3 defense. Then I guess they decided to give them 15 health but pulled back their defense to 2. So they were basically the same as Raichis. And they also gave them surprise, which was pretty great, but I guess they were maybe too strong. And now they've actually brought their health down to 10. These changes are all very interesting, but like also very confusing, and I will give more detailed thoughts about all of these changes later. The Jellies have gotten one significant change, which is that their defense is now 2 instead of 3, which is probably fair since they were quite tanky before. Kind of hard to actually estimate exactly how good they are in practice. They may still be really good. They may now be useless. I really can't tell. So another new thing with them is now their name is quite normal. Now, probably the most impactful change is actually to the Tridention. Tridentions now have persist instead of escape. This is huge. They're functionally now a different unit, which obviously is actually kind of equivalent to a knight. Just as the puffers are basically equivalent to a catapult, these are now kind of an Aquarian version of a knight. It's honestly hard to say whether they're now better or worse than before, because they're basically now gonna be a different unit. And It's hard to say exactly in which version they would have been adding more utility, but they may honestly be even more pivotal to Aquarion because the Aquarion will now actually have effectively access to knights. Their comparison to knights is pretty interesting just by itself, and they really are probably like on the same level. This may honestly be their most impactful change by far. So, next change, crabs now have auto flood, which means that they flood any tile automatically just by moving on it. So basically crabs now have the same ability as Polaris' super unit. They would interact with their own specific terrain. This is a really cool change. I did already say in the previous video that one of the only or one of the main viable ways to actually flood enemy terrain is using a crab. But even the crab itself, it doesn't usually feel worth to actually have it flood terrain. Well, now you don't have to decide. The crab will now just flood terrain automatically. So it will be automatically easier for you to follow up amphibians and Tridentions behind it. One thing I probably should have mentioned with the sharks is that the ability to move in deep water has actually been moved from the fishing tech to the marine life tech, which I guess makes sense because this is the tech that's equivalent to sailing for the normal tribes. So it kind of makes sense, but in general, that means Aquarium will actually take a bit longer to get into the deep water, which probably matters a lot for some maps like Waterworld. It may actually be a huge nerf to them on those maps. So the last noteworthy change, and one that's pretty big and confusing nerf to me, is all of the fully aquatic units, like the puffers and the shark, they have now lost their ability creep. And not only that, they now regard all of the flooded tile as difficult terrain in the same way that enemy ships actually do, which is kind of the opposite of what they used to do before. So you can see here, this buffer has two movement, but it cannot move in any direction further than only one tile. All of these are difficult terrain to it. And the shark can obviously move three tiles on the water. It can fully use its movement on water, but if you look here, it cannot move further where it's blocked by flooded terrain. So this change applies only to the creatures that are uh, fully aquatic, meaning they could not previously go on land. I think the new rule from what I'm seeing now is, for example, the crab and basically every unit that Aquarian has that has float but could go on the land, those units are basically going to be able to use their full movement in the flooded terrain as if it's normal water. And that includes the amphibians, the Tridentions, and the crab. Those are all examples of units that have float, but they were even before able to actually go on land. Theoretically, all of Aquarian's units by default would work in this way. It's just the amphibians, the crabs, the Redemptions, and the scuba. By the way, that's actually one of the changes. The mermaid cloaks were changed to scubas as another flavorful name. Those are the only ones that actually have more than one movement. But that's basically the rule. Only the units that previously could not and still cannot go on the land whatsoever. Those are the units that are now slowed down in the flood terrain. This is a super bizarre change that I'm currently not sure if I really like. Uh, I kind of, to be fair, I do kind of get why they've changed it, but I kind of am not sure if I like it, and I will talk about it further after I play the one big game that I had. But do keep in mind that I was not actually aware of this change when I started the game, and thus I did not play accordingly and try to train these units inland, thinking that they would be able to thinking that I would actually be able to use them there. And it felt super clunky and honestly messed with my head. In the early stages of that game, I struggled quite a lot because of that. Just do keep that a little bit in mind, just in regards to the next game, just in regards to the game. But yeah, I'm not sure if I like this change, but I will get into that a bit later. Alright, so these are now all the changes. Now I will actually start talking about my thoughts on all of them. So first of all, I guess I'll start with the changes that I don't really have any negative opinions or comments on. Those would first be the jellies. Them getting a slight nerf to their defense, I think probably makes sense. They probably were a bit too tanky than what they should have been. To be fair with the jellyfish, I think it's actually kind of really difficult to tell how practical they're ever gonna be. You really gotta actually test it against other players. And I have not. I've only played against bots, so I don't know how good they're gonna be. But they did feel like they were quite powerful in the previous version for only an 8-star unit. Now, one not realistically important change that I do, however, actually like, and I know a lot of people probably are super disappointed about that, but I personally have noticed the change to their name. And again, I know a lot of people are probably super disappointed that their name is now just a jelly, but I personally never would have called them anything else. I never would have called the jellies by their old name. I didn't really have a problem with their previous name. I don't think it was like too goofy or anything, but I really probably never would have referred to them as anything else but jellies. So I can only really be happy that their name is now officially a jelly. Another change that I think is great is the crab's auto flood ability. Actually, to be fair, I do not actually know how much sense it makes for a crab in particular to have the ability to automatically flood terrain, but like mechanically it makes perfect sense for Aquarian super unit to do that. And honestly, as if crabs weren't like already gonna be like a strictly better version of a giant, like they definitely are now. I mean, they definitely were in the previous version as well. Now that they also have an ability. To be fair, because of the changes to all the other marine units, the crabs did lose the creep ability. So as if like that really mattered a lot. To be fair, but yeah, now the crabs actually have like an ability that's pivotal to actually helping their tribe, like a core mechanic of their tribe, while having, in my opinion, basically the same stats as a giant, but honestly even better. I honestly think crabs may now actually be a bit too strong, because yeah, they're now not only obviously like a super powerful unit that you want to stop because you don't want it to like take your cities, but like now they're every single step into your terrain is actively helping out the opponent be able to reach you quicker, and thus they're even more of a priority to kill, which obviously is a difficult thing when they have 5 defense. So I honestly think that the caps maybe should honestly be a bit of a nerf target next, because I think they're getting to the point where like if Aquana's good, it's like if they get Aquarion to the point where they're good without the super unit, like their super unit's just gonna be broken. So I think they're probably a bit too powerful at this point, but I have not played them that much to know, and also have not played them against actual players that would know how to deal with the crabs. So of course I don't really know anything. Now, another new feature I can't complain about is the puffers, more in the sense that the puffers are great. They're a definitely super creative way to actually introduce a way to use the flooding mechanic in an actually practical offensive way. So they're great, but now an actual problem that I have is that they're really the only viable way to actually flood terrain in that way. And especially with the new changes to how the units move, is honestly, I guess, maybe even supposed to be less important now. But I kind of not sure if that's like really great, but I suppose I'll probably get into that last with the actual changes to again the actual flooded terrain. Now getting into the change that I'm a bit less positive on. So one of the changes that I'm not really sure what to think of is the deep water movement being moved to the marine life tech. On one hand, it honestly may be a good thing that with Aquarion, you are now actually forced to go into the water side of the tech tree in order to actually, again, get on the water. That may honestly be a good change overall. But I feel like it does take something away from Aquarion having such easy access to the water. Because before, even if you were on a completely watery map with Aquarion, you really didn't even need to bother with actually going into the aquatic side of the tech tree. And again, that included even with the first version of the rework, you could just go for Tridentions. And the first version of the rework obviously did basically require you to get fishing, but that's already kind of is a requirement on very watery maps, so that didn't really mean much. Now you are actually required. Well, to be fair, I feel like that would happen anyway with the rework to the Tridentions. But you definitely are now required to at least dip into the water side of the tech tree in order to even really be able to get on the water. Which, like, that ultimately may be a good thing, but I don't feel like it unnecessarily slows down Aquarion with one of the main things that's supposed to make them good, which is their immediate and really quick access to the water. And again, they obviously still have that, but with the shallow water, but on a map like Waterworld, not actually having immediate access to the deep water is a huge nerf. I honestly, to be fair, at the same time, that may also be fine though, because I did in the previous video say that Aquarion may have actually been a bit of a problem on Waterworld because them being able to get into the deep water so early. I mean, I think it's fine because it's a sensitive tribe, but the thing that actually made them really feel a bit broken there was the lost cities that they could easily find and get out of the deep water ruins. And that's I think that's the thing that kind of makes them a little broken on Waterworld. So to be fair, this nerf may actually be somewhat justified for just being a nerf to them on Waterworld in general. And this actually does pretty effectively address the specific problem that they had with the water ruins, which is that they would get on the water so early, and if they just found the ruins in time, they would be able to pick them up. No one could really do anything about it, and they would, get so many more villages than other tribes. This change in particular is an effective nerf specifically to that because, yeah, now they actually take longer to get into the water. At the same time, though, I feel like on maps where they're not as unbalanced, like continents, this is removing one of the big change that they would still have to some extent on that map, which is again immediate access to the deep water, which again on continents not as big of a deal because there aren't as many deep water ruins. Though theoretically, depending on the size of the ocean, it may be similar. So I don't know. It may just be a positive overall. Now, one change that does completely baffle me, and this one I even forgot to mention while listing all the changes, but the Atols now do not give one population when they're made. They only act as the road connection. They don't give population themselves like Polaris' outposts or anything. So they are now just a bad mycelium. They are now just a worse version of mycelium, that doesn't have like the extra, healing. Which to be fair, the mycelium is kind of sucky because the healing ability it has kind of isn't, really useful. But the thing is, the toll literally is now just like mycelium, except worse. It doesn't even have that healing ability. And I honestly don't know why they did that. I did talk about the Atols in the previous video, and I just did mention that they actually felt really useful in a lot of situations. I don't know what it is, but like using them in the Aquarian cities actually felt a lot easier than Semanti with the Mycelium. It actually felt like you were consistently connecting 3 or even 4 cities with only a single atoll, which was actually pretty cost efficient. But like I don't know, they didn't feel like too strong. Like they realistically again aren't better than the Mycelium. I feel like the only reason why they would be is just because Aquarian may be a tribe that would maybe want to use the toes more than Saimanti tends to actually use their mycelium. So I really don't think that this was a necessary change. And yeah, I honestly I don't. Especially now, I will get into that later. But yeah, especially now that the buffers exist and the actual other thing action that the deck provides you with the flat terrain still isn't changed. It still kind of sucks. Like I will get into that later, but there honestly may be no reason to actually unlock this deck whatsoever now. So next, getting into whatever the hell they're trying to do with the sharks. So the deal with the sharks is that even in my previous video, I did say that they felt a bit underpowered. They're supposed to be mimicking the rammer that normal tribes have access to, and they kind of are a rammer, obviously. Well, again, they used to be. They used to be 3 attack, 3 defense, and 10 HP, which is basically the equivalent of a warrior in a rammer, but that stat line I did say felt really clunky. And I even thought a little bit more about why it felt clunky, and I think I do know why. But yeah, there are other compared, which I think is actually the better thing that a unit should be compared to, is the Saimanti's Raichi, which is a better comparison because that's also another unit from a tribe that doesn't actually have access to the normal water units, and thus they have their own weird replacement unit for that. And it's also in the same way a unit that's mimicking Rammer, but it's just changed as a single unit, right? And the thing is that even compared to the Raichi itself, which isn't all that much different, instead of 3 defense, it has only 2, but it has 15 HP. In terms of defensive ability, those should actually be somewhat similar. To be fair, it actually differs because against different attackers, those stat lines actually would be able to tank a different amount of damage. So it largely varies in which situation which of the two stat lines would actually be able to tank more damage, but I did figure out why one feels better than the other, and that's the difference of when they attack. And the thing is, both the Raichi and the Shark have 3 attack, and if you just imagine a situation where they are attacking another Rammer, a unit with 3 defense, 2 units with 3 defense, when they clash against each other, they both take 7 damage if they're on full HP, all that stuff, right? That is, I think, what makes the 15 HP and 2 defense a superior stat line to the 10 HP with 3 defense, because in terms of pure defensive ability, they should realistically be, well, not the same, but equivalently good against differing attacks. But it's the attacking that and the retaliation damage that kind of messes up those statistics. Because when those units attack into, say, another 3 attack unit, and it realistically works the same for whatever unit they're attacking. But I'm using the one where they're attacking against the same amount of defense as their attack as just the best example. When the Reich attacks another unit, it takes 7 damage back, which leaves it at 8 HP, which, to be fair, it's usually still enough for the Rammer to finish it back, but that's not necessarily the case. And the thing is, if the Raichi is to survive, it's now on half HP, as opposed to if the Shark attacks another Rammer, it's going to take 7 damage, which is going to leave it at 3 HP. Again, in both of those cases, if they're just attacking with another Rammer, both of those units are just gonna lose depending on who attacks first. But in the case where obviously you actually, for example, attack a Rammer with multiple units at once and all that stuff, the Shark that survives such an encounter is going to have only 3 HP, which is less than half of its actual health, which first of all is going to die. What 3 HP the shark would die to basically anything, like even a bomber splashing. Like, for example, a bomber splash will not kill a Raichi at 8 HP, but it will definitely kill a shark at 3 HP. Again, even back with even when it had 3 defense. And also, even if the shark doesn't get attacked in any other way, during its turn, just on the next turn when you will want to use it to attack, the shark will obviously deal less damage because it will be on less than half HP, right? Heck, the Raichi is technically on slightly more than half HP, but that's a different point. That's why there, and I did say in the previous video, the 15 HP 2 defense stat line is realistically better than 10 HP and 3 defense, just because of how the units work when they attack. Now, this is where part of my confusion comes in. Thing is, they did actually, in the first change they made, they did actually make the shark be 15 HP and 2 defense. But then they actually did another change, which is very interesting, is that they gave the shark surprise. And obviously, surprise, like, literally mitigates the one actual thing I noticed about the stat lines being clunky, which is retaliation damage. When the shark actually attacks, it really messes up the math behind which of the stat line is better. Now, surprise obviously fixes that problem because the surprise means that the shark stops taking retaliation damage. Yeah, so surprise itself actually would have fixed the problem, but thing is, they then at the same time they did still make the shark 15 HP and 2 defense, which it's a bit confusing at that point. At least to me, I'm starting to feel a bit confused. But whatever, I suppose the top line was still largely fine. And again, the shark overall still is like comparable to the Raichi now, actually on an equal power, because to be fair, even with surprise, I don't think it's technically better because another ability that the Raichi just has that the shark didn't before is the ability to explode, which is like a specific synergetic thing with Cymantian stuff. But it is just another ability that the creature has that the shark didn't, and thus was kind of better before. With surprise, I would felt those units are basically the same, especially because part of the reason why I was worried by the stat line, in the first place, I thought the shark had those, slightly clunky stat lines with 10 HP and 3 attack, 3 defense, just to be slightly more different than the Raichi, and then they actually give the sharks a price, which actually would fix its problem with the things that make its stat lines a bit clunky compared to the Raichi. But then they changed the stats to be the same as the Raichi anyway, which I thought was the whole reason why the stats were like that, was just to make it slightly different. Was super confused. Now, then there's the whole other part, which I guess with that, maybe, and maybe that is the case. I kind of can't see it, but maybe with both of those changes, the shark being a Raichu with surprise, again, that also can't explode and all that stuff. But I guess that was maybe too strong. And now the shark is just 10 HP and 2 defense. I really don't know how I feel about that. I suppose to some extent I actually can see why the shark with surprise kind of would become potentially a better version of an actual rammer, and specifically only for the purposes of attacking other rammers. Because rammers are the tankiest underwater unit, right? And they're realistically the only one where retaliation damage would even matter. Okay, obviously against bombers, retaliation damage doesn't matter, they're stiff. And against the scout, it has one defense. The shark often will one-shot it, and if it doesn't, like, it still takes one damage back. That won't matter. I can actually kind of see how a shark with almost basically the stat line of a rammer plus surprise actually be a really good counter against other rammers, especially in the late game with aquatism, like giving defense bonuses. Rammers actually become a really big pain to actually fight because, especially because you mainly need to use other rammers. Well, you mainly use a combination of bombers and other rammers to kill them. But with the defense bonus in the late game, rammers start trading unfavorably against each other because they're each a 3 HP unit and they have defense bonuses everywhere. So they're realistically a 3 attack 4 defense unit. They a rammer attacking another rammer, I think, does 5 damage but takes 8 damage back, which actually makes the opposing rammer just able to take it out. In the late game, it's kind of never worth to hit a rammer with one of yours unless you can also finish it, which again is also difficult because with defense bonus you need 3 rammers to actually fully kill one. Because of that interaction with rammers having defense bonuses, the late game in the water actually becomes a bit stalematy until both players establish like a good proper amount of units with both rammers and bombers, and that's when they can actually try and start breaking through the or a line of enemy rammers. And in that situation, I can kind of see how a shark that basically is a rammer but slightly weaker, but it has surprise, so it does not take retaliation damage back. In such a place, that shark would actually be kind of revolutionizing, the interaction, because all of a sudden it won't be a problem. It won't be bad value to actually hit other rammers. Now, again, to be fair, also, I think that's only ever a benefit because, yeah, the late game, sometimes aquatic late game battles can actually feel super slow because of that. And the shark being able to do that, I feel like is only ever a benefit. Plus, even with that, I still wouldn't think the shark is that much superior to an actual rammer. In order for the shark to even get that extra value, it only works if the shark's the one that attacks first, right? And no matter whether the shark has a 15 HP 2 defense stat line or um a 10 HP 3 defense stat line, it's still gonna have either less defense or less health than a rammer. No matter in which one of the two stat lines, it still dies to two rammers. So it's not like the shark ever is unknowingly tanky to where the other rammers can't kill it, but at the same time it can attack other rammers for free. So I really don't think the shark would be a problem. And again, now they have 10 HP and 2 defense. So now they feel just super fragile. First of all, the sharks I feel like also get particularly badly hit by the whole, new way that the flooded terrain works, where they can't actually move through it very well. They struggle to particularly more than other aquatic units because the shark is a unit that needs to get the jump first, and if it doesn't, it absolutely sucks. And now that it's slowed down by that terrain, that means sometimes the only practical place to train a shark would be a coastline city. But even then, that city is on the coastline itself, so it's targetable by other aquatic units. You have to first set up a defense around the city to make sure the shark won't be getting smacked. And again, if it does, like if you train the shark in early game, like it literally just dies to two like smacks by a two attack unit, right? Which could sometimes happen. For maybe someone actually is able to like throw riders deep into your city where you actually train the shark and actually kill it like that. Especially because the shark actually doesn't even have fortify, like something that even like riders and knights have. But for a maybe more practical example, even if the shark is in the water, it will just die to two scout shots. Literally, if the shark doesn't actually get to attack first, doesn't get the jump on a unit, you basically trained a warrior for 8 stars, which is just insane. I mean, obviously there are glass cannon units that exist, but like, units that are glass cannons, like, do a lot, right? There's a reason why they're glass cannons, right? Like, the catapult, I mean, that's the biggest glass cannon unit in the game, right? Zero defense, literally almost dies to anything. That unit does, it's tied with a bunch of other units, most of them super units, for having the second highest damaging attack in the game, with the highest range. And the knight, and equivalently the Tridention that Queen is gonna have, those units literally are supposed to be able to combo 20 stars and even more worth of other units if they actually are in the right situation. Like, it obviously makes sense that those are units that are like super glass cannony. At the same time, I really can't make sense of why a shark would be a glass cannon, because it's literally just a rammer. Like, it just does 3 damage. Like, it's just a 3 damaging attack. But that's literally it. There is that unit doesn't do that much, and it literally costs as much as a Tridention. It literally costs as much as a knight and a puffer, right? Like, it costs as much as those glass cannon units that, like, do insane stuff, right, at a far distance. And meanwhile, the shark hardly does anything. It just has like 2 defense, right? Like, it has one more defense than a knight, and it doesn't even have fortify. And at the same time, yeah, it obviously doesn't do nearly the same as the knight, but it literally costs as much. So I personally think they should actually bring the shark back to this original version, like 10 HP, 3 attack, 3 defense. With surprise, I think that would be a fine version for the shark. Like, I honestly think that's fine. Um, in that case, honestly, it may be a slightly better rammer. Again, at least for the purposes of fighting other rammers. comparatively for 8 stars, you can get a armor with the defender, which would be 15 HP, right? And then there's a question like, would a 10 HP armor with surprise be better than a 15 HP armor? Which in the late game with defense bonus, a armor with surprise is probably better than one with 5 more health. But like, I think it honestly is fine if like Aquarion's version of armor is ever so slightly stronger than what realistic other types get for a normal armor, under the pretext that Aquarion is supposed to be the aquatic type and they're supposed to have very powerful units for the water. So I absolutely do think they should be brought back to the original starting of 3-3. I would be fine with 15 health and 2 defense, just like a Raichi 2. I would be fine with that too. It basically would be the same. With surprise, it honestly would be basically the same. So I kind of would prefer if it was the 3 defense version, because in that case the unit is significantly different than a Raichi, right? This is your opportunity to actually have a more unique design, right? Having this unit with surprise. And I absolutely think it should do that. So next, the change to the flooded terrain. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. On one hand, I think I understand why it makes sense that the water creatures can't actually move through this terrain. I mean, it somewhat makes sense that a shark that's supposed to travel to the ocean normally finds it difficult to actually move through flooded terrain that actual people can move through, meaning it really is not that deep water and such. And at the same time, mechanically speaking, the sharks and puffers and those units are basically the equivalent to ships and stuff for the other tribes. And the ships for the other tribes obviously do treat the flooded terrain as difficult terrain and can only travel to it one tile at a time. And mechanically speaking, it kind of makes sense that Aquarium's equivalent to ships as well, like, should realistically not be able to travel to what's effectively half land for them. At the same time, though, you can actually see exactly in the game I'm showcasing just how much my brain struggles with the fact that those units do actually move only one tile to that terrain. Again, realistically, I in that game should not have actually trained those units there. I think I already mentioned that, but I trained those units in that game because when I actually started that game, I did not actually know that this was one of the changes that was made. And thus, I did not know that those units behave in that way. And I realistically just should not have trained them in this situation at all. But uh, at the same time, you do see just how useless those units now are in terms of actually attacking someone on land. And I was saying, even in the previous video, like overall Tridentions still feel like they're gonna be the way to go in terms of actually attacking someone on land. And the thing is, again, and we'll get into that last, obviously Tridentions being reworked also potentially changes the way that dynamic works as well. But if this change remains like this, no matter in what version Tridentions, no matter how Tridentions actually look like, they definitely are gonna be the way to actually attack other tribes on land, because obviously the actual aquatic units are basically gonna be useless at it. And to be fair, that may not even necessarily be wrong, because and again, it kind of is the equivalent to other tribes. Like obviously, you unlock the water techs and the water units to do water combat with them, and then if you actually want to siege a city that's inland, you have to land your giants and such, right? But I do also feel like for Aquarion, again, the aquatic tribe, it does make sense for them to have a way to attack purely with water-based creatures. And again, they do, but I mean an actually viable way to attack with purely with water creatures. And a few other notes with the aquatic terrain. I did already mention that in the previous video, but I would actually like to see the flooded terrain in general giving the same sort of difficult terrain to other tribes trying to traverse it, as Aquarion actually has trying to traverse normal terrain. I realistically all the units, all the normal land units that try and move to the underwater terrain, they should treat all tiles difficult terrain, no matter what, and not even roads and stuff, right? And again, I did actually make a correction under the previous video, because allegedly you could not use roads on flooded terrain, at least in that previous version. And to be fair, yeah, that was in the patch notes themselves. They did specify that you could not, but I did not test that, so I didn't even learn it. Now, for this video, I did test it, and it must have been changed because now I tested it, and you absolutely can use roads on the flooded terrain, which, if anything, that makes way less sense than, a shark being able to travel through there without being stopped. And again, my other issue with that still hasn't been changed is the floating action is just like basically inviable. And again, I do love the new units, the puffers. I think they're a great idea to actually utilize the flood in an offensive way, but I don't think they should be the so only way you can actually use that feature. And in the current state, they basically are, because with their existence, there is hardly any reason to even really pick up the waterway stack. I mean, it's basically gonna be kind of like Saimanti's Mycelium, where Saimanti, the feature of that tribe is that all the units have creep, and their shaman boosts them, and that's their equivalent to rolls. Like that's their equivalent to being able to make the unit go quicker on that terrain. And because those options have been taken out of the tech, the only thing that's really practically there is the mycelium, just the actual road connections, which are just not great. If the floating action itself just remains like this and nothing else is changed, like the waterway stack is now basically useless. It's practically unviable to even try and take it because it's the action itself, and now it's not even the only way to spread flooded terrain. So that's one less reason to take it in general. But I think it's that's not the problem itself. The action itself is just way too hard to utilize, like just by itself, even before those methods existed. And now that they do, right, now that buffers exist, there is literally no reason to go for the waterway stack. So with all this said, I do have one idea for a very elegant solution. First of all, I do think that the flooding action should be available even after a unit moves. Like it should be the same as the attack action. But even if that doesn't happen, um, what I would now like to see, because I don't kind of understand the reason why the water creatures actually struggle moving through the flooded terrain, but I do have an idea, and that's I think there should be an ability for the water creatures to start being able to move through the flooded terrain without problems, and that ability should be in the waterway stack. Again, the waterways, it's supposed to be Aquarion's equivalent to roads. It's like that's why the flooding action is there. Because Aquarian flooding terrain is basically their version of placing roads so that the units can move through that terrain easier. So I think with this ability of water creatures being able to move through flooded terrain without downside, being put into the waterway stack, it would actually serve its function again. It would actually be the equivalent of other tribes having to take roles in order for them to actually be able to make proper use of some of their units, right? For example, try and using knights without roles. That's you need to take roles in order to use knights. Aquarian doesn't have to do that in the current state. They literally do not ever need to go for the waterway stack. And I think that is a bit of a missed opportunity. And in that case, it also I feel like would add like an extra layer of balance to the water creatures actually, being able to move through the flooded terrain. Because in that case, in order for you to do that, I mean, first of all, you would need to unlock obviously the water creatures, but then you would have to unlock like a whole extra second tier tech just to let them move through the flooded terrain. And then if you actually want to offensively use the creatures against another tribe and actually attack them with that, you would also have to pick up mathematics, a third tier tech. And I think at that point, like that should be balanced enough. So yeah, that's my personal proposal for how this whole flooded terrain should actually function at the end of the day. Plus, of course, roads should not be usable in flooded terrain. That's silly. So last and certainly not least, yeah, the change of Tridentions. I think overall, I have actually grown to love this change. Yeah, so it basically turns Tridentions from the unit that they used to be into a different form of knights, which just by itself is actually very interesting. Uh, But yeah, I overall, I'm still not certain exactly which of the two units has more value. But the new version definitely does compete pretty well. And yeah, overall, I do actually find it funny because Aquarion basically trades their best unit for the ability to actually have knights, which, yeah, there are actually reasons why Saimantis struggles in the late game and Aquarion struggles on the island maps. And yeah, one of those reasons is the access to knights. Now, just the comparison between Tridentions and knights is very interesting in of itself. The knight obviously has to chain units that are next, has to get a chain of units that are all next to each other. Obviously, because it's a melee unit and it has only one range and it keeps moving as it hits. The knight has to sneak through and get a chain of a bunch of fragile units that are all next to each other, which, if the opponent is smart, they could theoretically play around that. The Tridention has a theoretical chance to be way more consistent in that all it needs to do is be put in a particular tile, and then from there it has the ability to chain every single unit that is in a 2 tile radius of it. That does mean that Tridention realistically cannot do some of the insane things that the Knights can, but actually could theoretically be way more consistent in the amount of units each and every single Tridention kills. Because with the Knight, it often most of the knights you're gonna chain often end up being used as a effectively one use catapult shot, right? The knight does almost as much damage as a catapult, not even killing a unit, or maybe killing one unit, then smacking it to a bigger one. And one of the knights that you chain is going to get through that big unit and kill the fragile units behind it. At the same time, the Tridention can actually be a lot more consistent, and it can also be more useful in situations where the knight can't, like it has theoretically the ability to hit a bunch of units that are behind really big powerful giants and things like that. At the same time, obviously I did say it can do nearly the same insane stuff that the knight can, like being able to chain like sometimes up to like 10 units together depending on really how late of a position you are in the game, and also on how well the opponent is able to actually realistically play. And the one thing that I do feel has a little bit of a worse position for the Tridention in a direct comparison is the Knight has 3 tiles of movement, and obviously it can be rolled. Unlike the Tridention has only 2 tiles of movement. Now, obviously the 2 range somewhat makes up for that. It has the same effective range as a Knight, but obviously without any possibility of rolls. So that is a little bit of a bad comparison to it, because the whole point of the Denshan having range is that you can theoretically put it in a position where it can hit back lines and such. But with the short range that Tridention has, it is actually pretty difficult to put it in a position where it can hit the back lines. Like, it has the same effective range as the catapult, meaning that you can't actually put the Tridention in a position where it will be able to kill the catapult next turn, but it itself not actually being in the range of said catapult. And I do feel like that's potentially a way that it's quite underpowered compared to the knights. Now, the one thing that may make up for that is the obvious implication that the Tridention is an amphibious knight effectively, which may actually be a huge deal. Obviously, because current water combat has no such unit with persist or anything like that, and thus the dynamics are actually quite altered. Now, I'm not sure exactly if the Tridention as a unit with persist would be game breaking in such a place, because in general, in water combat, a unit with persist may not actually be as impactful as it is on land, mostly because the ships in the water are, for the most part, all much tankier than any of the units that are used in the late game on land, which is, catapults and knights. In the water, the really only units that are used in the late game are rammers and bombers, which are obviously somewhat tanky. And then there is also the occasional super unit, which again are also somewhat tanky. In the late game in the water, also every single unit has defense bonuses. So the rammer is 3 defense unit with defense bonus, and even the bomber, which is supposed to be the fragile unit, it has 2 defense. So even without defense bonus, it actually doesn't ever get one shot by a Tridention. And in the late game with defense bonus, it will actually have the same defense as the Tridention's attack. So that does mean that Tridentions may not actually be as game defining in terms of late game water combat as the Knights are on land. They still likely would be very useful because they could actually still finish off a bunch of units that are already damaged, and depending on the amount of those units they kill, that itself can make up their value. But it may not be as impactful, especially when they actually even kind of get outranged, or at least they have the same effective range as both of the units that they're actually supposed to be attacking. And that is one thing that I feel like maybe a problem with the Tridentions. So because of that, I think maybe the main reason why the Tridentions may actually be kind of worse in the current state. In the previous state, them just having escape, they were just a very strong unit. It's kind of hard to actually describe exactly the type of units the old Tridentions were, because I could kind of maybe attribute it to a catapult that's more mobile but has a bit less damage. But at the same time, the way I've described them before is they're basically a combination of a rider, an archer, and a swordsman. They really are something of that sort. Maybe the swordsman comparison is off there. Maybe it is just a high damaging archer that's also maneuverable rider. But they were just super good units, even though even before they did not outrange your armors or anything. Because they're so maneuverable, by actually spamming them, you could eventually overwhelm most other late game tribes in the water, just because the units were so cost efficient. And if their current new version ends up being a knight that's just kind of not very practical, Aquarion is definitely gonna take quite a bit of a hit from that. Especially when with the change to the flooding tile, the Tridentions are clearly meant to be the unit of choice to actually attack on the land. Plus, of course, then there's also the moment I haven't even mentioned that the Tridentions actually have only 3 attack, which is less than the Knights, which have 3.5. Uh, and the 3.5 attack is a pretty specific breakpoint for attack. Interesting enough, the Knights actually used to have 4 attack, uh, they, which was actually a little bit better than before. But the reason why the Knights weren't ever nerfed to only 3 attack is because this 3.5 attack was made as a middle ground, because 3.5 attack is exactly enough to where they can one shot 2 defense creatures, like just your regular warrior, and obviously they can one shot 1 defense units, but the knights with 3.5 can actually one-shot uh, 1 defense units even when they're on defense bonus. Meanwhile, at 3 attack units do one-shot 1 defense units, but they don't at defense bonus. So that is why the knight specifically has 3.5. So it can basically chain through every common unit that's not supposed to be particularly tanky. And again, Knight used to have 4 attack, which was actually enough to kill, again, warriors on defense bonus. Their nerf to 3.5 was specifically a nerf to that. They can't now chain warriors on defense bonus. Anyway, the knight has only 3 attack, which literally means they can only kill, I mean, catapults, archers, and riders that are not on, specifically not on defense bonus, and that's it. Those are the only units that they can one shot. Which is funny because that literally means the only, especially because the Tridention is an aquatic unit, that literally means that the only unit in the water that they can actually one shot is a scout. And even the scout they can't one shot if it's in the late game with the opponent's bot aquatism. With all that said, I don't know if the Tridentions are bad. They may be great. It's hard to evaluate them right now, and you have to test them against actual players. And I was saying in the start, the Tridentions may be fine. Because of their other unique abilities that the Knights actually don't have, they may actually be a perfectly fine alternative to Knights, but once I list on all the pros and cons of Knights and Tridentions, I do feel like if they are to remain in their version with persist instead of escape, they maybe should get a bit of a buff. Either I would say either they should actually get three movements, the same as the knight. Like that does mean just by themselves they will have a further effective range than a knight, but again that's fine because no one ever uses a knight just by itself. Everyone rolls knights. And the knight still can go way further with rolls that Redemption can reach without rolls, which it obviously can't use. And the other option is at least making the Tridentions have 3.5 attack. In that case, they can at least one-shot bombers, specifically 10 HP bombers, not on defense bonus, which honestly is actually overall pretty specific, I would say. But yeah, and they would also be way more practical actually attacking on land. Well, they will actually have the same ability to kill the exact same units that the knight will, which again is also probably what they're kind of meant to be used to actually attack the lands if the changes to the flooded terrain would actually remain. And so yeah, that's I kind of think the Tridentions may need a buff in their current state, but I honestly can't even really be certain that they do. Like, it's way too hard to say without actually having played them against actual players. Anyways, those are all my thoughts about the new changes, so end the video.